Hi, I'm Mike Lowe for Digital Camera. In our 30x Superzoom head-to-head, we're looking at the Sony HX100V against the Fuji HS20 EXR. Although both have 30x lenses, we're going to look at the differences between the two cameras and see which one comes out on top as the better choice of the two. The Sony HX100V has a 30x lens that equates to a 27 to 810mm equivalent. This ranges from fairly wide angle right through to a pretty significant telephoto. The lens has this manual zoom ring here which electronically drives the lens forward as you turn it. This means there's ever so slight stepping between zoom ranges rather than absolute accuracy for each millimetre of the zoom. However, there's a very clever little switch here which allows you to jump between zooming and manual focus. By comparison, the Fuji HS20 has a 24mm wide angle that goes through to a 720mm telephoto. This means it's a wider angle lens than the Sony, but it's also less able to go through to as full a telephoto extension. The lens itself is completely manual in that each subtle rotation of the lens will accurately translate as per using a DSLR zoom lens into the exact focal length. However, the manual focus ring is tucked right at the back of the base of the lens and can be quite frustrating to use. Both these models replace respective older versions. In the case of the Sony there was the HX1 and in the case of the Fuji there was the HS10. The noticeable difference from the change in the models is that the megapixel count has now gone up quite significantly. There's a 16.2 megapixel sensor in the Sony HX100 and a 16 megapixel EXR CMOS sensor in the HS20. In the case of the Fuji, the EXR is one of its biggest selling points as the way that the pixels are arranged is completely different to a conventional sensor, and Fuji claims that this makes for much better picture quality. When shooting at full resolution, both models produce reasonable to good images, but in order to consider this on a realistic scale, results aren't even nearly a match for larger sensor compact system cameras or DSLRs. Indeed, the highly populated 16 megapixel sensors may have just crammed a few million pixels too many in a bid to pull consumers in. The result is that, even at the lowest ISO settings, both the HS20 and the HX100V show pixel smearing and JPEG processing artifacts. Go above ISO 400 and this causes significant softening and the lack of edge definition in both models increases. Where it changes, however, is with the Fuji HS20's EXR sensor, when this outputs at 8 megapixels in size. Of course this is far smaller, but still a more than usable size for most work. Shoot in the EXR mode and you'll get the images with more detail. Detail is one thing, but there's also another way of looking at it. The Sony HX100V is by far the better of the two when it comes to accurate exposure. From a point and shoot point of view, this is an all-important area. Though the Fuji's RAW files, something that the Sony lacks, can go some way into tinkering with the finer details and exposure level. When viewing close up at 100% on a pixel level, it's the HS20's 8 megapixel output shots that win in terms of detail. But zoom out and it's the HX100V's images that just look better overall due to exposure and colour presence. In terms of use, both the cameras have 3-inch 921K dot screens on the back that are on tilt angle brackets and can be adjusted as so they can face up for waist level shots. Above this, on both models again, there's a 0.2-inch 200K dot viewfinder, which is an electronic viewfinder. Both of them are a little bit small, so they're not perfect in use, but they're certainly very useful, partly to help stabilise shots when you've got the full extension of the zoom, but also just in bright sunlight when the screens reflect quite badly, it's useful for seeing the right exposure levels and composing images that bit better. Both models also offer their own unique area of appeal. In the case of the Fuji, there's a TTL hot shoe on top which can be used for external flash guns, and as well as that, it's the only 30x optical zoom bridge camera to offer RAW files. Although the Sony doesn't have RAW file shooting, nor does it have a hot shoe, it offers perhaps a more consumer-targeted approach. There's GPS in order to geotag your images, and it's also able to shoot 3D images as well as 3D sweep panoramas. The Fuji does also offer a sweep panorama style mode, but it's unable to shoot in a 3D form. When using the Fuji, the autofocus is pretty nippy at the wide angle end. It's only when you begin to move through the zoom that you can encounter some problems. At the longer end of zoom, when you attempt to attain focus, the camera freezes on a single frame rather than showing the autofocus in real time. This can result in things moving out of the shot whilst you're trying to focus on them and is quite problematic. With the Sony at the wide angle, the focus is also relatively fast, and although the zoom isn't as quick in order to move from wide angle through to telephoto, the camera sort of keeps up with itself better. The screen is more reactive in keeping exposure levels correct than the Fuji manages to show in preview. Focusing also happens in real time, so you're able to see exactly where subjects are on screen, no matter what the telephoto length is. Both these models also offer 1080p HD movie recording. They've got one-touch buttons on their backs in order to quickly jump into the mode. Rather than the quality being the difference between the two, it's actually the operability of the cameras themselves. Although we like using the zoom ring of the Sony, it also has a zoom rocker around the shutter itself, so it's easy to hold the camera steady whilst extending the zoom. Comparably, the Fuji has the manual zoom lens, which is potentially great to use, but it's quite jolty in use, and this can cause some issues with some judder during playback if you intend to use the lens itself. Overall, it's very difficult to separate these two super zoom cameras, as there are pros and cons to each, but it's more a case of what you want to get out of the camera as to which one you're most likely to purchase. On the one hand, there's the Fuji, which has the wider angle lens at 24mm, and you can also use the lens manually. Plus it has a TTL hot shoe and the ability to capture using RAW files. In the case of the Sony, there's GPS and the ability to shoot 3D as MPO files. It also has a unique lens that just functions in a very different way to the Fuji, but it's the one that has the longer reach at 810mm compared to the two. In terms of image quality, there's actually not that much between it. There's more detail revealed from the Fuji when using the 8MP EXR mode, but it's actually the Sony that has the better colour and the more accurate exposure out of the two. So like we say, between the two, it's very difficult to pick a favourite, but it'll be down to which one is most suited to your needs.